What's new with Argo, why you should forget clusters and embrace environments, and how AI is changing the way we deploy software, all coming up right now on Argo Unpacked. I am your host, Dan Garfield. Welcome to the show. We're going to get started and talk about these really fun topics. Now, today, Rivital will not be joining. She is out this week, unfortunately. We will have her back in the next episode. Now, some of you may remember we were actually originally scheduled to have a discussion about what's going on with Argo at Adobe. Mike Tugeron was going to be on, but unfortunately had to cancel, and we'll get him rescheduled for another time. And wishing him a fast recovery as he's not feeling well. But today, instead, we have a pretty packed show, and I am bringing on the ever amazing, incredible Hostess Capolones. Hostess, welcome to the show. You've been on before, and you're basically like the godfather of Argo. I think a lot of people say they're like, I might adopt GitOps, but really what I do is the Hostess way.
So thank you, Dan. Nice to be here. I've actually was a guest, I think 3 or 4 episodes ago, talking about application sets. So we have several open topics where people said, "Oh, this is super interesting. Let's talk more." So today we're going to expand on some topics that we have touched before, like Terraform. Oh, teaser trailer, Terraform. Okay.
That's right. We're going to talk about Terraform, which is a popular topic we've talked about before. And we'll talk about this blog post that you've done, environments instead of clusters. But before we jump into those topics, we're going to cover the latest in the Argo news. We did have another point release to Argo 3.0 last week, and we have another one coming up. I'm aware of there's some issues with Azure workload identity not working in 3.0 due to a regression. And so that support is going to come back in the next point release, which I think is scheduled probably for this week, maybe next week. So just steadily working through, random issues here and there. But I think we're on Argo 3.0.5 now. So we'll have a sixth one before we get into. We normally have a fair number of little point fixes and security updates and things like that. So not too out of the ordinary. But one of the topics, we're going to cover a couple of those news items. First up, we're going to talk about Redis versus Valkey for a moment. So there's an issue that came up in Argo CD a while ago that was a request to replace Redis with Valkey. And this was due to licensing concerns because Redis announced they were going to be moving to a more restrictive license that did not allow people to, it was kind of a variation on the GPL license that didn't allow people to basically offer hosted Redis, and really targeting Redis providers, optimizers that have been out in the market. And so some people said, hey, well, is this now incompatible with Argo's license because the Helm chart or the customization includes a Redis instance? Are we required to switch it? And we basically came back and said, nope, we don't think that we are required to switch it because we don't have any Redis code. We're not hosting Redis. It's an optional thing that people can deploy when they deploy Argo CD. You don't even have to have Redis to use Argo CD. It's a lot less performant without Redis.
But, Dan, maybe we should explain to people how Argo CD is using Redis and for what.
Oh yeah, we can explain that briefly. So when Argo CD is tracking the Kubernetes state, it loads that state into Redis, and so there's a cache that it's hitting, so it doesn't always have to hit the Kubernetes API as much. And then also we use it when we render manifests. We store those rendered manifests in Redis so that we can do a comparison against the cached manifests without having to hit the Kubernetes API even. So that just, makes for better performance all around. Did I miss anything?
No, I think the key point is that it's not like a permanent database. In theory, you can empty the Redis cache at any point in time, and then Argo CD will slowly recreate everything. So it's not something major like a big component that is super mission critical. And also you can configure it. Like some people want, to just install Argo CD and get Redis out of the box, or they might have their own instance and do stuff like this. So that's one key point. And the other key point is that Argo CD is just using Redis. It's not embedding any Redis code. I think this is
Yeah.
a key point. I mean, other than the client, other than code needed to access Redis, but it's not like it's embedded anywhere. So this is why the
Yeah,
license is a bit more
there's a
clear.
CNCF license policy, allowed third-party license policy, and it basically says that if you're distributing code, it needs to be an approved license. And the license that Redis picked, which is I think it's a AG, I think it's called like the Redis source license, and it's a modification of GPL, is not compatible with that. However, we're not distributing the code of Redis, so or hosting it, which means it doesn't really impact us. Now, Redis has announced that for the next version of Redis, they're going to be changing the license back to something more open source because they're getting quite a bit of threat from Valkey. And they're going to be offering a license that is, it's not BSD, it's something else.
Yeah, so
I can't
coming back
remember.
to the
Go
previous
ahead.
point, when you get Argo CD, you just have a reference to the chart of Redis. This is what you get, like you
Yeah.
can install it. You're not installing Redis source code in Argo CD source code or something like that.
Yeah, that's right. So in response to Redis changing their license, there was the launch of Valkey, which is an open source fork of Redis, the last licensed available version that could be forked. And people are adding features there, and there's a number of people contributing to it. And it is an official CNCF project. So there has been a push from some people to say, hey, Argo should move from Redis to Valkey to support this. And I think what I've always said is like, hey, let's also support Valkey as an option. You can deploy Valkey today with Argo CD. You just modify the Helm chart. You just tell it to deploy the Valkey image and call it a day. So it's something we could document. But it is something where the CNCF has recommended to us. They just came back to us this last week and said, hey, we actually recommend that you use Valkey as a default, which is not surprising because it is a CNCF project. So I think we are going to offer it as an option and maybe look at migrating at some point to Valkey. But I think we also we know a lot of customers, users use Redis Enterprise with their Argo instance. So there's no reason to, we don't want to like lose support for those people that choose it. I think we just want to have it be in a position where it's like, you use the technology you prefer. If you prefer Valkey, that's fine. If you prefer Redis, that's fine. There are other replacements for Redis, competitors to Redis, that you could use potentially as a drop-in replacement. Your mileage may vary, up to you as a user if you want to do that. But so I think that is coming, that will have like an official support for Valkey. There's still some discussion with the maintainers that we'll get into, but so that's kind of enough for Redis versus Valkey. Let's see, Costas, we also have a deadline coming up for ArgoCon.
Yes, so the deadline for KubeCon has finished. So if you missed it, it's bad. But if you want to submit to ArgoCon, this is still open. And ArgoCon is a co-located event at KubeCon, KubeCon North America in Atlanta. So there is still time to submit like a CFP there. The deadline is end of this month, 30th of the month. And it can be any Argo topic for any of the Argo projects. It doesn't have to be just Argo CD. Actually, maybe you get even more chances if it's not for Argo CD, because everybody talks about Argo CD. So if you have another suggestion for Argo rollouts or Argo workflows or Argo events, feel free to do it. And also don't assume that you need to be like an expert. It can be something really simple, like my company adopted Argo rollouts, and these are the benefits that we gained after the adoption, and this is how we improved our process, and that's it. Just the adoption story. Super simple. You just check a case study. Of course, if you are an expert, if you are following on the projects and you want to talk about a new feature or something else, you can also do this as well. But don't assume that in ArgoCon it's only Argo experts. It's also people that are just using the project. It's not just developing. If you want some help, like if you want to know somebody to review your proposal, or you want some ideas, or even if you want like some more feedback on how to create the CFP, contact us and we can help you. We would be super happy, to help you get there. We want to see more people talk in ArgoCon and not just, the same people again and again and again. So you have 2 weeks. Think about it.
Perfectly said, Kostas. And coming up with the KubeCon North America, this is, of course, the ArgoCon North America that we're talking about, which will be happening in Atlanta. There was scheduled a GitOpsCon North America to be co-located at KubeCon, along with ArgoCon and a FluxCon, and it started to feel like a lot of cons, probably too many cons. So we did make the decision to move GitOpsCon out of the co-located for KubeCon. And we're going to be doing a virtual event similar to GitOpsCon EU, which just happened a week or 2 weeks ago. And Kostas, you actually gave a talk at GitOpsCon EU on Terraform versus Argo CD.
Yes, but before we get into this, I think it's super interesting. This is now a huge opportunity because now you have FluxCon. So even if you love GitOps, but you don't use Argo CD and you use Flux, that's fine. Go and submit a CFP for FluxCon and we will see you there. We love everybody.
Yeah, perfect.
Yes, so GitOpsCon Europe was virtual this time, and I had a presentation there. I pasted the link there. I don't know, Dan, if you can put it on. I talked about a super popular topic, how to combine Terraform and Argo CD, which is a very popular question. And essentially, it's a scenario where you are in a company and you already have Terraform and it's running just fine. Everything is super great. And then you say, okay, I need to add Kubernetes and Argo CD. And you don't know how to combine these two projects together. Let's see, I'm also going to point to the slides if you want to put this up, and the recording. And just to spoil it, it's not like there is a perfect solution out there. The presentation talks about 4 approaches. One is super simple. You just use a DNS, like you agree before you start and say, I expect my database to be at db.example.com. This is what the Argo CD application expects. And then you Terraform, you go and create a database. So there is nothing, to share. That's approach number 1. Approach number 2 is to use a Git provider. So Terraform has GitHub providers and GitLab providers, and you can commit files with Terraform. Yes, you can do that. So you can create standard manifests with Terraform, commit them to Git, and then Argo CD just looks at your Git repo. That's the only thing Argo CD does, which is exactly how you should do GitOps. But behind the scenes, those files were created with Terraform. So that's another approach. Approach number 3 is you inject Kubernetes resources directly with Terraform. So Terraform also has a Helm provider and a Kubernetes provider. So you can use those providers to manually create files in the cluster, which then, Argo CD cannot really pick up because those files are created with Terraform, but they can combine with the files that Argo CD has in order to create a full application. And then the last one is a GitOps bridge, which we have talked about many times here, where you use cluster labels to store some information that is coming from Terraform. And then with application sets, you load them into Argo CD. So these are 4 approaches. And at the end of the presentation, I'm also saying that the proper approach is cross-plane, okay? For 1,000 times, if you want.
So what you're saying is that the best way to use Terraform with Argo CD is to not use Terraform and just to use crossplane.
I'm just saying that for new projects, if you want to, if you love GitOps and you love Argo CD and you want to manage your infrastructure with Argo CD, instead of trying, to connect those two worlds, maybe for brand new projects, you can also look at crossplane, because if you use crossplane, it's super simple to create a cluster with Argo CD and the crossplane provider, and then load whatever information you want there. We actually do this in CodeFresh, both for our customers, but also for us. So if you look at how CodeFresh developers work, we have a crossplane composition that creates for you a temporary cluster, a preview cluster, and a code first runtime. So if I'm a developer, like a code first developer, and I want to do something, I just create a pull request with my file, and then boom, I have a cluster set up automatically without any Terraform involvement. So that's the teaser trailer. You can go and look at the recording. Let's see, I will post the recording as well. If you want to see this with more details, you can see the whole video. So if you expect a magic answer, there isn't, but take a look at the 4 approaches, and maybe one of them, might be perfect for your organization.
Yeah, perfectly said. So as we go along, as always, if you have comments, if you have concerns, if you want to yell at us, throw it all in the comments. We'd love to see it. We'd love to see it in the chat, and we'll address those as we go along. Whether you're joining on X, YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, LinkedIn, wherever it is, make those comments, and we'll pick those up. So let us know where you're joining from. We'd love to see it, and acknowledge your joining. So as we go through this, the thing we're going to talk about primarily today is about environments instead of clusters. And so this started as a blog post that Kostas did, and a lot of discussions that we had in how we approach software delivery. And maybe we can introduce the topic with the problem, Kostas. Like, why shouldn't people, like today, people just go into Argo CD and they can select a destination cluster. Half the time it's in cluster, and then sometimes it's other clusters. What's the problem with this approach?
Dan, can you also put the URL on the screen if it's possible for people to look at this?
I actually put the URL on the screen.
Okay. So I want to take
fresh.io/blog.
I want to take a step back and talk a bit about a very hot topic, which is developer experience. And this is, just my personal opinion. But if you look at the Kubernetes ecosystem right now, we have made the choice and we started with operators or SRE or admins. So you can see many companies are trying to help Kubernetes administrators, okay? And you have so many tools that are for administrators, like how to create a Kubernetes cluster, how to manage a Kubernetes cluster, how to secure a Kubernetes cluster, and that's it. And then if you ask, the ecosystem, okay, but where are the tools for developers, like developers that are using Kubernetes? There are so few. And Codefresh, obviously is one of them, and this is why we're pushing for this. I was also a developer for 10 years before, doing all this Kubernetes stuff. So I'm feeling the problems of developers. And right now, I don't think that we have enough tools for developers. So this is coming back into the general discussion about developer experience and what developers want to see. And the article starts by saying developers don't care about clusters. They don't care about clusters at all. So this is something that if you're an operator, you should understand, because I can guarantee right now that any internal tool that you have created shows clusters. And developers don't care about clusters. Developers care about environments. If you ask, developers what they want to do, they want to do a single thing: create a feature and pass it from all intermediate stages until production. And the way they talk and they communicate is via environments. When they deploy something to production, they don't care if production is 1 cluster, 2 clusters, 3 clusters. They don't care at all. This is not important for them. So if you start with a tool, and Argo CD does this with clusters, you're not giving to developers what they want. Developers want to see environments. So the article has like an imaginary dashboard, and I'm explaining at each point what you should do and slowly build up an imaginary interface. But the central point is this: start with environments. Developers want to talk about environments. And then if you have environments, you can understand that the next thing developers want is promotions and not deployments. Because again, if I'm a developer, yes, the initial deployment happens in dev or whatever is your first environment. But all the other environments until you reach production are just promotions. You want to promote something from dev to staging. You want to promote something from staging to production. Developers don't really want to go to production and deploy any version. This is not how things work. Maybe there are some special cases, some hot fixes and stuff like this. But in day-to-day operations, developers want to go to production and promote whatever is in staging, and same for
Yeah.
staging. So this
Well,
is
I
what
think,
developers do every day. They promote stuff.
yeah, this is sort of key to the whole conversation of clusters versus environments, because the only reason that it's like, okay, why do developers even want to look at a cluster, right? And it's like, well, I just want to know if my thing made it into production. So already we know from the motivation, they don't actually care about the cluster per se. They just care about, where is it available? Is it available in staging? Is it available in development? Is it available in production? And this was something that I thought you captured really well, because um, people don't really define those environments the same way. So like when people are defining production, there sometimes it's a Kubernetes cluster, sometimes it's a namespace. We see that very commonly in large organizations, where each organization, each team gets a namespace where they can deploy their app to, or maybe each app gets its own namespace, and teams have access to multiple namespaces. So there's a big multi-tenant Kubernetes thing that we see is very common. But then the opposite is also true, where we see that people have production means some clusters in this region and some clusters in this other region. It may be, multiple spanning clusters. And then you go all the way to like an edge use case, where production means that it's deployed to 3,500 clusters in retail locations or something like that across the globe. So when we define production, when we define an environment is a logical unit that any organization can operate off of, whereas clusters could mean anything, right? They could be QA, they could be scoped to a namespace, they could be one component of production, or one specific location in an edge cluster example. So the fact that people think of cluster, cluster is what we use in Argo CD, because Argo CD originally is envisioned as a tool that just deploys to Kubernetes, and so it's not really making any judgment or discussion about environment. But do you think that we should actually have environments in Argo CD, or is it better done in other tools?
I think it can be another tool like Argo CD. We have said many times that it's great as a sync engine, and it's a
Yeah.
tool that should work with clusters and Git repos. But if you look at the basic Argo CD application, just the application CRD, it's super simple. It is just a link between a Git repo and a cluster. Boom, that's it. There is no other knowledge there. So if you want something else, either you need to expand the application CRD, or create something else, or layer something other on top. But coming back, to your previous point, I would like to say that between these two extreme scenarios, like where you have a developer and production is some namespaces in a cluster, or production is 3,500 clusters, for a developer, this should just be a hidden detail. It should not be exposed to the system that they are using. As a developer, I just want to promote my application from staging to production, and I don't care where production, is, and if it's one cluster or 10 clusters, or some namespaces. I think that's the key point. Or what developers want. You can talk about operators and what tools they have for managing those clusters, but speaking from developers, this is what they want, just promoting stuff between environments.
Yeah, in some ways, knowing the cluster is as interesting as knowing the node. I don't care what node my pod is deployed on, right? Like it
It's on a node
only
somewhere,
becomes
yes.
meaningful. What's that?
It's on a node somewhere that is part of a cluster, and I don't care where this node actually is.
I might care when I go to debug it. There might be some information about a node that is like, oh, it's got some taints on it, or it's got some, maybe it doesn't have the GPU capability that I'm trying to provision or something like that. And that might be helpful for me to debug what's going on with my application at some level. But in day-to-day operation, 99% of the time, I don't care about the nodes that a pod is running on. I actually don't care what cluster it's running on. I care if it's in production, whether that means a cluster or 2 clusters or 100 clusters or a namespace or whatever. It doesn't really matter. And I think this is like, you probably see this going back too, right, Kostas, where like when people were using Jenkins to do their deployments, the thing that they were filtering for wasn't necessarily like what VM it was deployed to. It was like, oh, is this like the production pipeline?
Yeah, I might have like 5 VMs or 50 VMs. I don't care about individual VMs. Same thing. Dan, we should also talk about the Git hashes. I think it's the other important point of the article. We
Yeah,
shouldn't forget about this.
yeah. Let's talk about that because when you're using Argo CD, typically you just point at the thing that you see in the interface of like last sync deployed is a Git hash. And the biggest challenge with GitOps initially that people sort of have when they get into the developer experience is when we tell people to adopt GitOps, the very first thing we tell them to do is you should separate out your application, code from your manifests that are being deployed because you want to manage that life cycle separately, right? You want to be able to make changes to the code, ship new binaries, and then only update it when you're ready, which means that's in a different manifest. That manifest is typically going to be in like a DevOps repo or GitOps repo where everything is represented. And we'll come back to that, I think, a little bit when we talk about using the latest revision in your applications. But that means that when you have a change that Argo is looking at, it's looking at a repository that primarily contains manifests and doesn't contain any application code. And so that Git hash 70% of the time just has an image update on it. And that image update doesn't tell you anything about what's going on. So a Git hash ends up obfuscating code changes, right? And this is something that you talked about, and I think you recommended sort of versions over Git hashes.
Yeah, this is actually a good practice, even if you forget about GitOps. Let's forget GitOps for a moment. You are an application developer, and when you communicate to your clients or your customers, you want an easy way to tell them, get the latest version of the application. So what is the latest version for you? And we know in advance that there are some great choices for this, like either it's a build date or a build number or a version. This is how you should communicate with other people. Nobody cares about, a Git hash. I think the biggest problem with Git hashes is that if you have two Git hashes, you don't really know what is the oldest and what is the newest, which is the number one question that you usually ask. What version is there, or what version this customer has, or what version is in QA? So even before we talk about GitOps, Git hashes mean nothing for deployments. And then when we get to Argo CD and GitOps, as you already said, instantly we have two kinds of Git hashes for source code, which are great during the development phase. Maybe I need to do some things during development, and Git hashes for Kubernetes manifests, which mean absolutely nothing, like for the application. So when you see, how Argo CD works, it works with Git hashes of the manifests. And if you look at the features like, I don't know, Git history or rollback, like how do you do rollbacks with Argo CD, not Argo rollouts? You go back to a previous Git hash of the manifest. I don't care about, the manifest. I care as a developer about features, about the source code. So you need some way to implement a version in your application. And if you're using Helm, that's great. Helm already has the concept of version, and actually Helm is super smart. You actually have access to two versions. You have a version of the Helm chart and a version of the application, and it's up to you to decide when something new happens what version you want to bump. So maybe it's a new feature in the application and you keep the chart the same, or you have made an agreement and you also change the version of the chart. Up to you, it doesn't really matter. But this only works for Helm charts. And we know, people don't use always Helm. Sometimes they use Customize or Plain Manifest or other tools. So you need some kind of designing a version, like a universal version for everything. A version where you say, this is the version of my application, this is what I deploy, this is what exists in my environment, and this version has everything I need, the container image plus my configuration. And Argo CD doesn't have this concept. Okay, that's the problem. So right now, if you look at what most companies do, either with Argo CD or with their own systems, they force developers to look at clusters and Git hashes. And developers don't care about clusters and they don't care about Git hashes. So you're making the life difficult for developers. And sometimes you might not even understand that you're making the life difficult for developers and that there is a better way to do this thing.
Do you think maybe this is our fault, Kostas? Because we've told people you should make sure that your sources are immutable. And things like container tags or versions can sometimes be mutable. And so maybe maybe people took our advice to an extreme, and instead of just saying, and they said, oh well, we'll just use hashes. Hashes are great, but that actually came at the expense of developer experience.
I think the problem was that Helm did not become the standard. Like the fact that we have Helm customize plus other tools is a problem on its own. Imagine a world where only Helm exists. Then would solve several problems. I'm not saying Helm is the best solution. I'm just saying it would be great to have a single solution for this kind of problem. So either we should standardize our Helm or create the concept of a version like centrally and say this is a version of the application. And if you think about Kubernetes on its own, doesn't actually define a version at all. It defines a deployment, and then Argo CD defines an application. So imagine a world where Kubernetes said, not only I will define an application for you, but also I will define what is an application version, and I will define different strategies, build numbers or dates or whatever. And this thing worked out of the box, then all the tools could use it.
Yeah.
So I think our mistake is that we never defined what is an application and what is an application version for non-Helm users. Like for Helm
Well,
users,
and
maybe
it's
it's not a
so
problem.
it's so variable by organization. Like you mentioned earlier, like some people just use build date, right, for their versioning of their application. Whereas other people do like a full-on Semver version. Some people do just the hash as their version, which I think the hash one, I think we're recognizing is like, okay, well, hashes are really good for a GitOps operator to look at because it knows where it can reference the hash, or you can go and look at it. That's not specific code that's linked to it. Um, but for developers, for the users, you actually want to expose something different. And this is actually the approach that we took in CodeFresh, right? Like we have in our promotion tooling, you can by variable define where to look for the version. If you wanted to look at a Helm chart version or a Helm app version or some other, JSON path, YAML path, you can do that. That's totally fine. You can pick whatever you're using for your versioning, even if you're using a Git hash. And we recommend against using the Git hash for the visual of the user to look at. It's meant to be flexible because we do know that there is such a plurality of different approaches when it comes to versioning.
Yeah, last time I checked, I think we have for each service a file called service YAML, where we define the name of the service and the application, and then we have instructed CodeFresh and say, for this application, you can find the version there. And for some, Helm charts, you could also change and say the version of the application is coming from the Helm chart. Up to you. It's super, flexible, but you can define exactly what the version means for you. And once you have this basic building block, you get all the nice features of CodeFresh where you can compare versions across environments and promote versions across environments, which is, if you remember, is what developers want to see. Like the final dashboard is a dashboard that shows environments plus versions of a single application, and you can instantly see how this application travels via environments, and you can see numbers. Like you can see, okay, production has version 1.2 and staging has version 1.3. So you can instantly understand that production is one version behind staging, and if you want to promote, you will get all the changes that happened between 1.2 and 1.3. So this is what developers want to see,
Yeah.
and you can understand. There isn't any cluster here. Clusters are behind the scenes. So this column that says QA might be a single cluster, 10 clusters, two namespaces. It doesn't really matter. the other column might be something else. You can mix and match. Like you can have QA be namespaces, staging be namespaces, and then production it's separate clusters. Up to you. As far as the developer is concerned, it's all the same. Like it's still the same experience.
Yeah, and this I think actually gets us closer to maybe Kelsey Hightower's original dream. I don't know if you remember this, but back when he was writing like Kubernetes the hard way and first promoting Kubernetes, I seem to remember that Kelsey said something like, "I don't know if Kubernetes should be the interface for developers, but the API is going to be around forever." And it was kind of the sentiment of like I don't know if developers need to learn Kubernetes. I don't know if that needs to be the primary interface. And as operators, we think about clusters because those are the things that are running, workloads and whatnot. But then to have a way to translate that back to something that is usable and important for them, that makes perfect sense. So I think we're kind of realizing that dream. And then this goes to kind of the last point, which you were talking about in promotions, which is when I promote something to production, I could promote a version. I could promote a Git hash, right? But we already know that Git hashes aren't really useful for developers. Or I could promote based on another environment, right? So I could say instead of in production push 1.3, say, hey, take whatever's in staging and put it in production. And so now you're comparing environments directly rather than even going through the convention of a version.
Yeah, well, this was actually written from personal experience. I was working in a really big company. I would say it's a gaming
You don't want to
company
say which one?
that the name starts with B. Big game company where the name starts with B, okay? And it has a very popular game that starts with W.
It's got a whole world of games.
And
a craft, as it were.
And one of the things that amazed me there, and for me it was really strange, that the internal platform that you have for deployments was so powerful that you could go to production and there was a drop down and you could just deploy to production any version that you wanted. So imagine, where the case where staging has 1.3, production has 1.2, and you click this drop down and by mistake you choose 1.1. And of course, you should spend some time there and maybe, you click the deploy button and you realize your error a bit later. But for me, this shouldn't be allowed. Like a very easy way, to prevent this kind of stuff is say by default in production, you cannot put a version that is, less than staging. Maybe there is some kind of special override or some kind of, special permission.
Yeah, if you need to do a reversion.
Yeah, if you want to do like this. But if you look at everyday deployments, almost always 99% of the times you want to get what is in staging and push it in production. So if staging has 1.2, you shouldn't have a drop down in production. You should have a default control that says take 1.2 from staging and push it to production. This is what you should do in the most simple scenario, and then you can prevent any deployments that are happening by errors like this, like choosing the wrong thing.
So what was the impact when that happened to you at the company you worked at when you pushed the wrong version?
I never, actually did the mistake because I was super helpful. But the fact that the UI allowed me to do this mistake in a super easy way for me was a disadvantage.
Yeah, and this is useful in the opposite direction too, right? Because if I want to debug something that's happening in staging, and I'm like, oh man, I need to pull this into a development environment, I could say, just deploy what's in staging into my development environment, and suddenly I'm just in sync with what was in staging. I didn't even have to look at the version to know that I was getting the right thing. So this is part of the ethos that's built into the CodeFresh GitOps, where when you do promotions, you can just say, hey, promote from staging, and yeah, it'll show you the version and stuff. But you actually don't right now have an option to deploy arbitrary versions. They need to be in an environment for you to even deploy it. And then of course there could be policies that are specific to production or staging.
Yeah. If you want, you can allow people to do something else, but it shouldn't be the default. Like as a developer, I almost always just want to promote to staging, or maybe there is a bug in production and I want to take the same version in production back to staging for debugging. if you offer me these two scenarios, you have covered 99%, of what developers need, and it only leaves 1% for hot fixes or emergency situations or stuff like this. So make the 1% case difficult in the UI and the 99% case super easy in the UI, and not, the other way around. This doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a great introduction to why you should use environments instead of clusters. We got the blog post on the screen. We'll put it in the show notes for those that are just listening. You should definitely go read the entire blog post. We are going to talk a little bit about AI near the end of the show, but before we get to that, I think we need to talk about kind of a consequence of this approach. Some people are abusing Argo CD target revision to do promotions. And this is an area where I think we have strong disagreement with that approach.
Yeah, I think we have actually mentioned this. Let me see. It's the other blog post about application sets. But essentially, if you look at all the guides we have written, our advice is that, again, what developers want to see is changes in manifests. Like if you want to make a new version of the application, you change the manifest. There are some manifests for Argo CD that control the applications, but these are usually files that you create once. Like you create once, you create your application sets, and we have talked, application sets here again. And then these application sets are not something that you expose to developers. You should not force developers to look at Argo CD files. They don't care about this at all. So if you choose your promotion mechanism and say, my promotion mechanism is the target revision, you instantly create so many problems. First of all, now you force people to look at two places. If I want to understand, what application is deployed in an environment, first I need to go to the application CRD, look at the target division, and then go to the Git repo and choose the branch or the Git hash or whatever the target division refers to, and look at those files. And this is like a complex process that shouldn't be that complex. If you want to promote, like you instantly need to understand, what should I push the target revision to? Do I choose like a new branch or a new cluster or something else? And if somebody asks me about the history, again, it's super difficult. So let's say somebody asks you a very simple question: what was in production last Thursday? So if you choose this pattern, you don't really know, because you might go, to the target revision and see that last Thursday it said 1.2 or QA or something else. And then to go to another Git repo and go to that history and go to last Thursday and understand what that branch was last Thursday. So you're making life difficult for everybody, not only, for the initial promotion, but also for how you look at the Git history and how you understand what was deployed where. And everything now a two-step process. You need to first look at application YAML and at the manifest and do a manual correlation, because I'm not aware of any, tools that help you with this.
Yeah.
And there is a better way. Don't use target revision for promotions.
Yeah, I think target revision makes a certain amount of sense for doing an immediate rollback. But you can usually do that rollback in Git instead. And then you have like a full, history of it. There's an autolog of it. It's all there. And the thing that I would say with this is that you want to have uniformity of information across all levels of your deployment definition. So I should be able to, let's say I don't have Argo CD. Let's say Argo CD is broken irrevocably. I should be able to go to Git and run one command to rebootstrap all of my components onto my cluster, which means that my manifests are organized in such a way that I can, from one command, get the verisimilitude, the truth of what is supposed to be deployed onto that cluster without Argo CD even being involved. That's level one. And then level two is I got Argo CD bootstrapped. I should be able to re-bootstrap all of the applications that Argo CD has, and then it can go and deploy its stuff from one command as well. And so when you have that alignment between each level of both the manifests for your applications and the manifest that Argo CD is going to do, that you're managing Argo CD with, then it doesn't matter what entry point you come in from. You always have the same story to tell. You always have the same manifest, the same versions. So as a user, I don't need to know which specific thing I'm supposed to look at. I can just go and look, directly at the manifest and have that information. I don't need to. There's no confusion. So that solves a lot of things. And when you don't have that, when the revision is changing, like you're saying, now it's like this confused mess of spaghetti where I don't know what's supposed to be deployed. I have to go and look at each individual application to figure it out. Messy situation. And that's one of the issues with using the application set progressive sync, is that it turns off auto sync and then it goes and manually updates the revisions. And it's meant to be temporary. So it's a temporary problem. It's a few minutes problem. But and then there's something going on with the stream where it's like showing the countdown. Just show and hide this and see if it'll stop. Okay. Anything else we need to say about target revisions, or are we ready to talk about AI?
Give me 1 minute. I want to say something like, think again about developers and what developers want to see. I'm always saying that you should always ask the question, if you have a developer in your team and they are experts on Kubernetes, okay? They know everything that needs to know about Kubernetes, but they don't know anything about Argo CD. Can they run locally the application? And you should always answer yes. As a developer, I should be able to go in a single place, get some Kubernetes manifests, and locally in my own Kubernetes cluster, run the application and replicate exactly what is in production or QA or staging. If you tell me, hey, this is not enough information, you also need to install Argo CD and then go and look at the target division and see something else, you have instantly made my life super difficult. I shouldn't care about what Argo CD does as a developer. I should be able to just take the Kubernetes manifest, take the customized overlays, the Helm charts, whatever use, and run only them, and instantly to create an environment without anything else. So if you are abusing target division, you're making life difficult for you and for the developers.
Yeah, agreed. Okay. Apparently I was using the wrong microphone, so sorry that the entire episode was me far away. Hopefully I sound better now. Anyway, okay, so we've got a few minutes left, and we had promised we were going to talk a little bit about AI and the impact AI is having. So Kostas, I want to get your reaction to this. We've had a lot of people asking us like, hey, what's the future with AI? How's that impacting software delivery? How are you leveraging AI? And there's a number of things that we're doing within CodeFresh, within Octopus Deploy, to bring AI tooling into the software delivery story. But the biggest impact that I see right away is that as people adopt AI, they become more productive. I've seen this myself. I'm using Cursor to do software development on Argo CD, and it's super helpful for doing PR reviews. I've only done 1 or 2 PR reviews in the last week or two because I've been on vacation, but it's super useful when I'm writing features. It's super useful to help me autocomplete something that I'm writing. And I'll do some work and I'll say, wow, I just did in 45 minutes what would have taken me 3 days of work to do. And maybe there are just better engineers out there that are like, no, it's faster for me not to use it. But for me, for my level of engineer, I'm much more effective with it. And so the thing that I look at as the impact is, as developers adopt AI, they become more productive. They ship more changes more frequently, which means the burden on testing, the burden on code review goes up. And so you really need to have a software delivery system set up that can handle a much larger volume and potentially with a little bit less reliability, so that as people ship things, they're going to trust the AI more and more, and maybe they'll make mistakes here and there. Maybe the AI is going to be perfect. But you need to have a robust system set up that can handle doing an automated rollback, automatically detecting problems, that can help you get back to a previous working version immediately. And so you can do progressive delivery so that things are maybe tested with a small portion of your users first. And if there is a hiccup that comes from this increased frequency of change, it's a few seconds, only impacts a few people, is automatically reverted, and you're back in the running, and you're not blocking future changes in the meantime. That feels like the challenge. So I want to get your reaction to that. Do you think that that's the biggest impact on AI adoption, is actually going to be getting your software delivery, chain to work effectively?
Yeah, actually, this is not my idea, but I always like to think it's a multiplier. Okay, just pick a number. AI is a multiplier by 5. So now instantly you have developers in your company and they are sending features 5 times faster. And the big question is, can your deployment system handle these features that are coming 5 times faster? Do you have enough processing in place to understand, how to promote all these features and how to make sure that they end in production in the best way possible? And if something goes wrong, as you said, can we roll back like quickly? Because you can imagine that with a higher rate of features, we might also have more failures or more cases where you need to do something else. So you should handle both scenarios. The happy path scenario, where you're sending 5x the amount of features and everything works fine, great. But also the unhappy path scenario where something goes wrong and you need to take into account the rollback process. So can you do that? Okay, and it's a multiplier. It doesn't have to be 5. Maybe it's 3. Maybe it's 10 for your company. I don't, really care. You should also look at the same number as an individual level, like as a developer. So maybe it makes me 5 times better if I know, what feature I want to send, and now I can send 5 features instead of 1. So for me, this is actually best for us because it makes deployments even more critical. Like it makes deployments more important. And if a company says before AI, I deploy once per month, maybe this was acceptable. But now, if you as a company you say I deploy once per month, then you will be left behind by your competitors who will employ AI and deploy much more often.
Yeah, this is a good quote that John is feeding us. We'll put it back on the screen. But it's vibe coding is where 2 engineers can create the technical debt of 50 engineers. And that definitely does feel a little bit true. I mean, there's definitely like, you're like, wow, I'm coding these features really fast. And like, honestly, for me, using Cursor, I found the code quality to be pretty good, though I have had to tweak it, right? Like I actually at one point added a prompt that was, when I was working at Argo CD, it was like, make these changes, but do it in the style of the code base that I'm in. Do it in the style of Argo CD. And I noticed that suddenly I actually got dramatically better results because it wasn't trying to enforce some other style convention that was maybe more popular on Stack Overflow or whatever. It was actually kind of taking into account the code base I was working in. And so I found that the results were better. But I like what you said about it being an amplifier. And I've heard some other people say that AI amplifies what's already there. And if you're a bad engineer, you're going to be a 5x bad engineer. And if you're a really good engineer, you'll be a 5x really good engineer. Yeah, we've got another one published. It's a conversation between ChatGPT and Claude Code. Can you fix this issue at Claude Code? No, I decide I don't care. And the comment is, see, they're just like human programmers. Yeah, that happens.
Yeah, it's a multiplier. So if you are 1.2, you get 5 times 1.2. But if you are 0.1, you get 5 times 0.1. So I think you should always understand, the basics, the ecosystem, what the customers want, the features, and then see AI as an implementation detail that helps you do things faster. But you should understand what you're working for, like
Yeah.
what features do you want to push faster.
Yeah, because ultimately the AI does what you tell it to. And so if you tell it to implement something in a stupid way, it will implement it in a stupid way for you. You know, but if you said, what's the best way to implement this thing, you might have a little bit of back and forth, even with the AI to help coach you on what a better approach would be, what would be more scalable or more secure or whatever. And so there definitely feels like a lot of maturity is going to happen over the next, year, 2 years, 6 months, 3 months, 2 weeks, where the coding platforms are getting better and better at taking into account these scenarios. But you end up in the same place, which is people deploy a lot more. And that puts a bigger burden on your deployment tooling and your testing infrastructure to make sure that things are working really well, especially like, people will get a little bit on autopilot, right? Where they'll be making changes, putting out PRs, things will be working, and they'll do that for a week. And so suddenly they're like, do I need to look as closely at the code as I would in the past? No, they'll become a little bit complacent. And so they'll run into issues where suddenly it won't work because they weren't looking at it as carefully, and they're just pushing out. Look, let's put it this way. What if I, as a developer, normally put out 20 releases in a year, just my own little little changes, and I have an error rate of 1%? Well, I'm probably only going to have one regression failure over a course of 5 years. Not bad. If I become 5x more efficient and I start deploying 100 changes per year, so now, my goodness, like the value of my work is so much higher because I'm doing 5x the work, but my error rate is still 1%. That means I'm going to have a failure every year. And you multiply that across 5 engineers, 100 engineers, 1,000 engineers, and your error rate, even though it's the same, because your deployment frequency increases a lot, means that for your users, there's going to be more error rate. It's going to feel like more errors over a time period, right? They're getting a lot more features, they're getting a lot more bug fixes, they're getting a lot more value, but they're having an impact on reliability, right? So having that strategy of like, I can do a canary, I can do a blue-green deployment, I can use Argo rollouts, I can do a Git-based rollback, I have an automated, GitOps promotion system like CodeFresh GitOps that can handle going up. That becomes almost the most important part of your entire tool chain, because it is the thing that makes the AI imbibable. It makes the AI consumable because you have that reliability that comes out of it. So, Kostas, thank you again for joining us this week. I know we're pretty much out of time. Any last things we need to promote? Obviously, follow us on Argo Unpacked on Twitter, X, on whatever social media platform, on Blue Sky. Use that. Follow us on YouTube. We do have the podcast up now, so you can follow us on Apple iTunes podcasts, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Spotify.
And we've got argounpacked.com. Sorry, go ahead, Kostas.
And Spotify. I think it's Spotify as well.
Yes, and Spotify as well. That's right. If you listen to your podcast on Spotify, you can get us on there.
Get your CFP for ArgoCon. This is what I want to say. Come and talk to us in ArgoCon.
Yes, we'd love to see your talks at ArgoCon. Kostas and I are both on the program committee. So, actually, we haven't formalized the program committee yet for ArgoCon, but we've been on every single one so far since the beginning of ArgoCon. So I expect we'll do it again. But yeah, we'd be happy to help out, reach out to us. Would you prefer they reach out to you on Twitter, Kostas?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
On Twitter
or Slack, the CNCF Slack. We are also in the CNCF Slack.
Yeah, hit up Kostas on CNCF Slack. Me, I prefer probably on X. So you can @today was awesome, but you can get Kostas or myself on the CNCF Slack. So with that, I think we'll come to a close. And thank you everybody for joining us for this wonderful session. And we'll see you in 2 weeks to talk about the latest in Argo. This is Argo Unpacked.